Interesting because my character kind of started happening unconsciously because I was suggesting it to myself that I was gonna need this and it was gonna be my friend.
You think you know the story of American teenagers turned guerrilla fighters, but the real battle was happening off-screen. Patrick Swayze, C. Thomas Howell, and Charlie Sheen weren't just playing teenage soldiers. They were surviving John Millius's obsessive military boot camp that blurred the line between acting and actual combat training. What you're about to discover will shock you. A director so consumed with war fantasies that he put young actors through psychological conditioning, Cold War paranoia that influenced every frame, and political controversy that nearly ended careers. From Swayze's desperate attempt to prove his leadership to the brutal animal killings that traumatized the cast, prepare to uncover the shocking truths behind one of the 1980s most controversial films. The Wolverines weren't just fighting Russians, they were fighting for their sanity. Patrick Swayze, Jet Eckert. Patrick Swayze arrived at Red Dawn carrying the enormous pressure of being the film's lead. But what audiences never saw was how playing the responsible older brother Jed triggered his own deep insecurities about leadership and masculinity. The secrets behind his preparation reveal an actor willing to sacrifice everything to prove he belonged among Hollywood's tough guys. The most shocking truth, Swayze was terrified that he wasn't tough enough for the role. Despite his dance background and natural athleticism, he felt like a fraud trying to play a hardened guerrilla leader. This insecurity drove him to extremes during John Milius's brutal boot camp training. While other actors complained about the harsh conditions, Swayze pushed himself harder than anyone, often training alone after official sessions ended. Swayze's method acting went to dangerous extremes. He insisted on learning real military tactics from actual special forces veterans, spending weeks studying guerrilla warfare manuals and survival techniques. He lost significant weight to look like someone living off the land, and he practiced weapons handling until his hands were raw and bleeding. Cast members said Swayze carried himself differently after the training. More rigid, more alert, like he was constantly expecting an attack. But here's the most devastating secret. Swayze's relationship with his real younger brother Don was strained during this period because Patrick became obsessed with being seen as the leader of the young cast. He felt responsible for their safety and performance in a way that went far beyond his actual role. This pressure manifested in controlling behavior that worried his co-stars, who watched him transform from the friendly dancer they'd met into someone genuinely intimidating. The role took such a psychological toll that Swayze later admitted he had nightmares about combat scenarios for months after filming. He'd become so immersed in Jed's world that he struggled to separate his own identity from the character's militant mindset. C. Thomas Howell, Robert Morris. C. Thomas Howell's transformation from innocent teenager to hardened killer was so convincing it terrified audiences. But the shocking truth is that his performance came from a method acting approach so extreme it genuinely worried the adult actors on set. What Howell did to embody a child soldier reveals the dark side of an industry that pushed young actors to dangerous psychological limits. The most disturbing secret? Howell's character arc in Red Dawn, from naive kid to cold-blooded killer, required him to access parts of his psyche that no teenager should explore. Under John Milius's guidance, Howell studied real cases of child soldiers from various conflicts, learning how violence could transform innocent kids into weapons. This research left him genuinely disturbed and changed his entire worldview about war and human nature. Howell's preparation went to frightening extremes. He spent hours practicing the 1,000-yard stare of combat veterans, studying how trauma manifested in facial expressions and body language. He would sit alone between takes, maintaining that hollow-eyed look that made his co-stars uncomfortable. Powers Booth, the adult actor who played their mentor, later said watching Howell's transformation was like witnessing someone lose their innocence in real time. But here's the most shocking revelation. Howell's famous scene where he executes a Soviet prisoner wasn't originally scripted to be so brutal. Howell himself suggested making it more violent and emotionless, arguing that his character would have been completely dehumanized by that point in the story. His performance was so chilling that several crew members had to leave the set during filming. The role's psychological impact lasted long after filming ended. Howell became obsessed with war films and military history, and his subsequent career choices, including controversial roles that damaged his reputation, can be traced back to his experience playing Robert. He later admitted that Red Dawn showed him he had a capacity for darkness that both fascinated and terrified him. Charlie Sheen, Matt Eckert. Charlie Sheen came to Red Dawn as Hollywood royalty's rebellious son, but his performance as the younger Eckert brother became a vehicle for channeling real anger and resentment that had been building for years. The secrets behind his on-set behavior reveal an actor using his character's rage to process his own family trauma and emerging addiction issues. The most explosive truth. Sheen was already struggling with substance abuse during filming, using drugs and alcohol to cope with the pressure of living up to his father, Martin Sheen's reputation. But instead of hindering his performance, his real-life chaos actually enhanced his portrayal of a teenager traumatized by war. The famous scene where Matt breaks down after killing his first enemy soldier was Sheen channeling genuine emotional pain about his own life. Sheen's relationship with Patrick Swayze became genuinely tense during production, mirroring their characters' sibling rivalry but extending far beyond the script. Sheen resented Swayze's leadership role both on and off camera, feeling like he was constantly being overshadowed despite his famous name. This real animosity created authentic friction that elevated their scenes together, but made the set atmosphere uncomfortable for everyone. But here's the most shocking secret. Sheen's wild behavior during Red Dawn's production became legendary among the cast and crew. He would disappear for hours between takes, often returning in an altered state that worried the other actors. During the brutal boot camp training, Sheen treated it like a party, bringing alcohol and drugs to what was supposed to be serious military preparation. John Millius actually had to threaten to fire him to get him to take the training seriously. Director John Millius wasn't just the director of Red Dawn. He was a man obsessed with war, weapons, and right-wing politics who used this film as his personal fantasy of American resistance. But the shocking secrets behind his methods reveal a filmmaker whose military obsession crossed the line from artistic vision into dangerous psychological manipulation of his young cast. The most disturbing truth? Millius designed Red Dawn's boot camp not just as actor preparation, but as his own twisted experiment in creating real soldiers out of Hollywood kids. He hired actual military trainers, including Vietnam veterans and Special Forces instructors, to put the young actors through genuine military conditioning. But Millius took it further than any director before him. He wanted to see if he could actually break down their civilian identities and rebuild them as warriors. Millius's political motivations were far more extreme than audiences realized. He was a fervent supporter of the NRA and had deep connections with military contractors and defense industry lobbyists. Red Dawn wasn't just entertainment for him. It was propaganda designed to prepare American audiences for what he genuinely believed would be an inevitable Soviet invasion. He studied actual guerrilla warfare manuals and insurgency tactics, incorporating real military strategies into the script. But here's the most shocking revelation. Millius's obsession with authenticity led him to implement psychological techniques borrowed from actual military training programs. He deliberately created stress, sleep deprivation, and physical exhaustion among his young actors, believing this would produce more authentic performances. Some cast members later described it as a form of psychological abuse disguised as method directing. The supporting cast. The supporting players in Red Dawn carried their own secrets and struggles, creating an ensemble dynamic that was both supportive and deeply troubled. These actors witnessed the transformation of their young co-stars and dealt with their own demons while trying to survive Millius's military obsession. Powers Booth, playing the adult mentor figure Colonel Tanner, became a genuine father figure to the young cast members, but not in the way anyone expected. Booth was a Vietnam veteran himself, and watching these kids go through military training triggered his own PTSD in ways that shocked him. He hadn't thought about his war experiences in years, but seeing teenagers learning to kill brought back memories he'd buried. The most heartbreaking revelation, Harry Dean Stanton, who played Charlie Sheen's father, had an emotional breakdown during his brief scenes. Stanton was a method actor who always stayed in character, but playing a father saying goodbye to his sons before they disappeared into the mountains triggered genuine grief about his own relationship with his estranged children. His famous scene where he tells his boys to avenge me was so emotionally raw that even the crew was crying. Lea Thompson faced unique challenges as virtually the only woman in a testosterone-fueled environment. She later revealed that the male-dominated set became increasingly primitive as the actors embraced their warrior personas. Thompson had to fight to maintain her professionalism while surrounded by young men who were becoming genuinely aggressive and competitive. The brutal boot camp, John Millius's pre-production boot camp for Red Dawn, wasn't just actor preparation. It was a psychological experiment that pushed young performers to their breaking points and beyond. The secrets of what really happened during those weeks in the Colorado wilderness reveal a training regimen so intense it would be considered abusive by today's standards. The most shocking truth? The boot camp lasted 3 weeks and was designed by actual military personnel to replicate real special forces training. The actors were awakened at 4 a.m. every day, forced to do hours of physical conditioning, weapons training, and survival exercises. They slept in military barracks, ate military rations, and were subjected to constant verbal abuse from drill instructors who treated them like actual recruits. But Millius took the training into genuinely disturbing territory. The actors were required to kill and butcher their own food, including rabbits and chickens, to understand what taking a life really meant. Several cast members became violently ill during these exercises, and some refused to participate. C. Thomas Howell later said, "Watching the life leave an animal's eyes changed something fundamental in him that he never fully recovered." Political controversy and Cold War context. Red Dawn wasn't just a movie. It was a political statement that ignited fierce debate about American militarism, Cold War paranoia, and the glorification of violence. But the secrets behind its creation reveal how deeply the Reagan administration's policies and fears influenced every aspect of the production. The most explosive truth: the film received unofficial support from the Pentagon and various military contractors who saw it as valuable propaganda for American military preparedness. Defense industry lobbyists actually provided funding and equipment for the production, though this financial backing was kept secret from audiences and critics. The Soviet Union's response was swift and furious. Pravda, the official Soviet newspaper, published scathing reviews calling the film fascist propaganda and a dangerous escalation of Cold War tensions. Soviet diplomats filed formal complaints with the U.S. State Department, arguing that Red Dawn was designed to prepare American audiences psychologically for actual war with the USSR. But here's what shocked even Hollywood insiders. The film's violence was so extreme that it briefly held the Guinness World Record for the most acts of violence in a film, with an average of 2.23 acts of violence per minute. This wasn't accidental. Millius deliberately created a movie that would desensitize audiences to warfare and make military action seem not just necessary, but heroic. The most controversial aspect was the film's portrayal of guerrilla warfare tactics, which many critics argued could serve as an actual training manual for domestic terrorists. FBI analysts reportedly studied the film to understand how it might inspire real-world violence. Production nightmares. The filming of Red Dawn in the remote Colorado Rockies became a survival test that rivaled anything the characters faced on screen. The production secrets reveal a shoot so dangerous and chaotic that it's miraculous no one was seriously injured or killed. The location itself was chosen specifically for its harshness. Millius wanted the cast to genuinely suffer in the wilderness. Filming took place at 8,000 feet above sea level in temperatures that regularly drop below freezing. Several actors developed altitude sickness, and the thin air made physical scenes nearly impossible to perform safely. The most terrifying incidents involved real weapons. Millius insisted on using live ammunition during certain scenes, and multiple accidents occurred where actors nearly shot each other. During one night scene, Charlie Sheen fired blanks so close to C. Thomas Howell's head that Howell suffered temporary hearing damage. The weapons master repeatedly complained about safety violations, but Millius overruled him. Weather became a constant enemy. A sudden blizzard trapped the entire cast and crew for 3 days without adequate food or heating. Several crew members developed hypothermia, and emergency helicopters couldn't reach them due to visibility issues. The actors later said those 3 days felt more like real guerrilla warfare than anything they'd performed for cameras. Red Dawn proved that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't on screen, it's behind the camera. These young actors survived Millius's war games, but the real battle was learning to live with what they'd experienced in those Colorado mountains. Subscribe to uncover more.